Our keynote today is the founder and CEO of DarkTrace. DarkTrace is the first artificial intelligence company in cybersecurity. They're the first one to focus on artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. Our keynote was awarded the Artificial Intelligence Leader of the Year in 2017, and she was also named Cybersecurity Woman of the Year in 2016. She is hailing to us from San Francisco, California. Please help me in welcoming Ms. Nicole Eagan.
Thanks very much. Well, thank you for that great introduction and such a warm welcome. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm going to focus quite a bit on this whole area of how artificial intelligence can be used for cyber defense. I'm going to also talk about some of the evolving threats that we see. We will show a brief demonstration, mainly so that you get a visual idea of how AI can kind of transform how we can fight cyber threats. And then most importantly, I'm going to give you a bunch of real-world examples of things that we found that you probably haven't read about in the news yet because we detected them before they became real issues. We're also going to end with an open Q&A session too, and we're going to have some folks with microphones so you can ask some questions. So I know that everyone in this room are security experts, so I don't want to cover ground you already know, but rather I want to talk about the evolution of some of the new types of threats we're seeing. There's one area, and that's trust attacks, where you have heard about these in the news, like the DNC hack. At the end of the day, that is a trust attack. The whole intent of it wasn't necessarily for the sake of stealing data or any monetary gain. It was actually to get all of us to lose our trust in democracy. Believe it or not, these trust attacks are very usually well thought out, well planned. They have a very specific purpose. And they're not just on democracy. We have seen trust attacks actually against corporations. It's something to make sure that your executives consider and think about. I know sometimes executives say, I don't want to be on a security watch list. I'm the CEO. Guess what? I'm the first one that wants to be on a security watch list because I'm more apt to be a target than some other employees in the company. And those trust attacks very much can go after the CEO, the CFO, someone on the board of directors, anyone that is a public figure in the company. And so you do have to watch out for those. The reason I bring them up is that your traditional security tools that you've deployed are likely not going to detect those attacks. They can involve bribery, bribing an inside employee to actually use credentials, right, to get at this information. Those type of attacks are very hard to detect, but we're going to talk about how you can use technology to find those. Now, ransomware we have read about and we've heard about. I think the interesting part about malware, ransomware, WannaCry, this week, I guess, Bad Rabbit, is that some of these, and WannaCry was a great example, they move so quickly that it's not necessarily the sophistication of the attack. Yeah, they've got some clever technology in it. It's that it just moves so fast that your security team has trouble detecting it and stopping it as quickly as it spreads through worms, machine to machine. And that gets to the point that we have to start to recognize that sometimes our human security teams are going to need a little help. And that's because these attacks can move so fast. We're typically understaffed. There's a lot coming at us all at once. And that's a role that we'll talk about, how artificial intelligence can augment your human teams, maybe even slow down an attack. So for example, when certain ransomware hits, and we have some great examples both for ransomware and WannaCry on our website, we automatically spot the attack and just put it on pause. And that enables your human team to actually kind of get eyes on it and decide what they want to do about it, what action they want to take. So it can be about just slowing things down so that humans buy themselves some time. Never mind that maybe it hits at 2 or 3 a.m. and you don't have a 24/7 team. Insider threat, I think, is one of the hardest ones to find. One of the reasons for that is it's not as blatant. It's often an area of gray. It's not very black and white. And we all want to trust our employees. We want to trust our contractors, everyone we've given access to the systems. However, insiders can also start very innocently. In fact, sometimes there's no malicious intent at all. Maybe it was a system administrator that decided at 2 a.m. when there's an issue on the network, they don't want to drive into the office. So they bend the rules a bit, they open a door into the network, and they forget to close it. And now that's left vulnerable. Maybe it is a bit more malicious. I'll talk later about an example where we're actually starting to see privileged users abuse and take access of resources to do things like manufacture and mine bitcoins in their own environments without telling anyone about it. And that one, actually, we have caught 993 cases of that in the last 60 days in the United States. And I'll give you the depth of the use case a bit later. But insiders also, they can start non-malicious and turn malicious over time. We had an insider at a customer that we caught who basically just figured out one day he could access the backup email server. Okay, maybe it doesn't sound like a big deal. He then figured out he could read the CEO's email. Then we behaviorally started watching. He started doing this while drinking his coffee every morning before starting work. Now, we were able to catch this because it was unusual behavior. He hadn't previously been going to the server, and now he was. No one else was going to the server on a regular basis, so it stuck out like a sore thumb. We were able to quarantine off the behavior without him catching on to this so that the company could watch it but be confident data wasn't going to leak until we could determine whether he actually was going to turn malicious or not. So again, there's that gray line of starting innocently, turning malicious over time. These are all examples where traditional rules and signature-based tools, perimeter defenses, are not going to come to your rescue. These are some of the use cases where machine learning and artificial intelligence can help us all out. So now that I've kind of set some of the scene, what is the answer? We keep seeing these attacks. And I know all of you and your companies have invested a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of processes to try to stop these things. And I think there's now a recognition that we're never going to keep them all out. It becomes much more about how can we detect them early and do something about it. So when we started DarkTrace in 2013, we said that these traditional approaches of perimeter defense, rules, and signatures, I guess we could throw some machine learning and artificial intelligence at it, but maybe it's just a fundamentally wrong way to look at the problem. It's just not enough. So we started the company in Cambridge, the United Kingdom, and we had several graduates from the University of Cambridge in deep learning, machine learning, different probabilistic math like Bayesian estimation. And we also founded the company with some intelligence community experts out of GCHQ, MI5, and the never talked about MI6. And they were explaining this problem to these young graduates. And one of the graduates stood up and he goes, "Do you know, I think I have a new way to approach it. The human immune system has been keeping us all safe for millions of years. It has an innate sense of self, and then it understands what's not self. And although we have skin that keeps us pretty safe, occasionally bacteria and viruses that we've never seen before still get in." I said, okay, well, nice principle. How would this actually work in practice? And he said, well, we could use unsupervised machine learning to drop in a network. We could analyze all of the network traffic in real time. We could pull out hundreds of silent, subtle data features, and we would use those to build up a pattern of life of every user and every device that was connected to that network. But it wouldn't stop there, and he didn't like the idea of a baseline. He said, because just like our immune system, we have to keep learning. So for example, I just finished an around the world trip. I'm sure I was exposed to things I'd never been exposed to before. But my immune system was self-learning, and it kicked in with that precise response. So I said this would be a self-learning technology. I said, okay, with you it all sounds great. We have to assume that our customers are not all going to have teams of machine learning and AI experts to tune this or feed it data. And we actually met that challenge in that we can install this immune system in any network in anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour. You don't touch it, and we don't touch it for 1 week. And we come back in 1 week, and we can show you previously undetected, unknown events, incidents, and threats inside of your network using this machine learning technology. And that's what we'll show you. So that detected the threats, and that we've now deployed in over 4,000 networks, all different companies, all different sizes, all different countries around the world. But the next logical question is, okay, now you've done a good job finding these threats and finding them early. What are we going to do about them? So this is where we needed to emulate the human body's antibody system. And we wanted to create digital antibodies. And we wanted this to have a very precise response to any previously never before seen threat. So not just known threats, unknown threats that had never been detected or seen by anything before, just like our immune system can do. So we created a second product called Antigena. And what Antigena does is it learns the pattern of life from DarkTrace, and then it basically tests the threat, validates it, and it has to start to understand, because we're not looking for known threats, is this benign or is this interesting? And that is a whole different approach. How do you use artificial intelligence to understand benign versus interesting? Because we've all heard about false positives, and we don't want to play that game. So we want the AI to understand and learn benign versus interesting and only surface those things to us that are interesting. So we used a different type of machine learning to do that. We used something called supervised machine learning. Now, a lot of the machine learning you hear about is supervised, but normally in security it would be used in a very different way. Usually supervised machine learning would be looking at historical attacks, known bad, and then they would use the AI to try to predict future attacks based on historical attacks. Again, our theory is that really any better than a signature? We don't think it is. So we said we're not going to use that. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to watch human analysts. So for the past 4 years, we've been watching world-class human analysts day in, day out to determine whether threats are interesting versus benign and to figure out how they investigated them and what actions they took. We continually do that, and we take that information and we put it in algorithms back into the Antigena product. This is how we can start to raise the bar in augmenting human threat analysts. This is a very interesting concept, and we call it autonomous response. You probably hear of autonomous vehicles, autonomous all over the place, but this autonomous response, basically what it's doing, it's enforcing the known pattern of life of those users and devices. It's taking actions in a very precise way. So it's not like the old method of shut that connection down, wipe that machine, take it offline. Actually, going back to that email example, that person was still doing their job 90% of the time. So why take the whole machine offline? Let them keep doing that job with the 90% of the time that they're doing the right thing. Quarantine off the 10% of the time they're doing the wrong thing and investigate that. So it's extremely precise because of this concept of pattern of life, enforcing pattern of life. I want to go a little bit more into the self-learning, deep learning. There are a lot of, again, different types of attacks. One that we recently worked on is DNS tunneling, but there's numerous other examples where we at any given time have about 20 different research projects going in our lab. Company-wide, we have 600 employees. Roughly 200 of those are either mathematicians, machine learning experts, software developers, or threat analysts who work side by side with our customers. Out of that group, we have 35 who have PhDs in areas relating to machine learning and deep learning. So we're always running these research projects to come up with what the next great thing is that we can use the AI to help augment the human analysts. We actually call that project Project Turing after Alan Turing, who was one of the early thinkers in machine learning. So we're not stopping with the ability just to find the threats, be able to autonomously respond. We're always going to be introducing more models, more concepts, more algorithms to keep moving this up. One of the reasons for that, and this is, I think, one of the most satisfying things we see at DarkTrace, is after we have customers who've been using this a year, 2 years, 3 years, their whole security program changes. They're no longer chasing yesterday or today's attack because the technology is actually doing a lot of the heavy lifting for them. They're actually now working in partnership with the business to be forward-looking. Maybe they're actually helping to do due diligence from a cybersecurity perspective on the next merger and acquisition transaction. Every time you acquire a company, you're acquiring their past, present, and future threat. Of course you should be doing due diligence during that process to understand what's going on in the network, whether there's a nation state in there lifting intellectual property out of it, or whether they just have a messy network and poor security practices. So we're seeing that this helps the human security teams start to make that transition from constantly being reactive to actually starting to partner on all these digital transformation projects and be forward-looking. Or maybe they're now only worried about the 20% of threats that humans are left that have to investigate for business context. So it's a real interesting transition once we can start shifting the mindset of how the artificial intelligence can augment our teams. I mentioned the network traffic. One of the most common questions I get is, do I mean net flow? So I like to clarify, when I say network traffic, it's 100% real-time network traffic passively. It's not sitting in line, it's sitting totally passively. And we're pulling out 400 data features. In comparison, net flow is 20 to 30 data features. Okay, why do we care about how many data features? Well, if you're using net flow, the attackers know which 20 to 30 data features you're analyzing. So right there, it's a problem. But in addition to that, when you're looking at 350 to 400 data features, you're able to correlate what otherwise would be considered weak indicators of threat, but by correlating them with other weak indicators of threat, increases your probability and likelihood that something unusual that shouldn't be going on is going on. So you're never alerting or triggering on an individual dimension. And that's really critical because what it means is when we give you the probability weighting of a threat, it's something that is very accurate. It's something that's worth taking a look at. In fact, in most instances, in a small to mid-sized company, we're usually highlighting only 3 to 5 of these per week. It's a very manageable number. In larger companies, maybe it's 15 to 20 or 30, but there you're talking about maybe a large global bank deployed in 90 countries with a very large security team. So it's a very manageable number, and it's because the AI is looking at and correlating so many of these data features. Now, I know in many cases people say, well, network traffic is important, and one of the reasons we love network traffic is logs by nature are historical, and therefore they can be altered or changed. And attackers are very often coached to cover up their breadcrumbs by altering the log files so that no one knows they were inside the network. So we would never rely solely on logs, but what we will do is take network traffic and correlate it with logs, correlate it with endpoint, correlate it with third-party threat intelligence feeds, but all doing that in such a way that the models are properly weighting it. And by the way, the inside of your network and what's really going on right now in your company is more important than everything going on the outside. What's relevant is whether that external attack is starting to produce itself inside your network. So correlating the outside threat feeds is important, but we don't think would be where you would want to start. I'm going to give you one quick example before we show this in action so that you can visually kind of get a feel for how it works. We're seeing a lot of connected devices, IoT devices, come into corporate networks. It can be through the building itself. So everything from the HVAC system, LED lights. We actually had an attack recently, and we saw it come through an LED lighting system, physical security systems, and those can all be used as jumping off points into your network to do lateral movement. But in addition to that, we're starting to see employees bring in their consumer devices from home, and they don't tell the IT team, they don't tell the security team, hey, I just walked in with my Amazon Echo, my Raspberry Pi. You know, Amazon produced an API for the Echo, and now you've got enterprise software vendors actually being able to connect to it, so people want to bring in their Echo. We have executives bringing in Echoes, asking for their daily reports verbally. And we, through DarkTrace, will detect right away when those Echoes are plugged into the network. And maybe the password hasn't been changed, and maybe someone's scanning your network trying to find all the unprotected consumer IoT devices that are connecting up. But this, I'll give you two quick examples of Raspberry Pi being brought into an environment. So we're working with a digital media company, a very large one, and they said, look, we have a culture where we cannot stifle creativity. In fact, we encourage everyone to try out new devices because, you know, if our consumers and our customers are using them, we need to know about them. We embrace social media as part of digital media. So we were in, we do 30-day free trials. We were in a 30-day free trial, and we detected a Raspberry Pi connected. And they said, you know, we're not really bothered by that. It's within our policy. I'm sure there was a legitimate business reason. We said, well, did you know that they didn't change the default password, and we can actually break into your network and get whatever information we want through this Raspberry Pi device? They were like, okay, maybe we care a little bit more than we thought. The next one, though, was even more interesting. We were in a very secure data center. In fact, they have biometric physical security systems. Everyone has to put their thumbprint in to get access to the building, and then a certain set of thumbprints had access to an even more secure area. So very strict security, kind of think government-like level security. So it's a customer of ours, we're deployed. Our threat analyst says, I'm seeing 2 Raspberry Pi devices, and they seem to actually be accessing data off of your corporate data center servers. So we share this finding. It's visual in our UI, and they say, okay, we'll look into it. So the next week, we come back again, and we go, what was the outcome from that investigation you did of what looks like those Raspberry Pi devices siphoning off data from the data center? They said, we investigated it, and we've decided your artificial intelligence, that's a false positive. It's not really happening. We said, well, that's unusual because we visually can see the data. We're analyzing your network traffic, and so there is no way for there to be a false positive. So this got very contentious, and we went back to our gurus in our R&D lab, and we said, how do we find these Raspberry Pi devices? How do we prove to this customer that this is really happening in their environment? So they said, we'll write a geospatial location system, and if they'll let us come in with this geospatial location system, we'll find these devices. I'm like, we can do that? They said, yeah, we'll build that. We'll have it to you in about a week. I said, okay, great. We get the approval. They let us in with these geospatial location devices. We found the Raspberry Pis under data center floorboards. We were escorted out. The FBI was escorted in. So I can't give you great details, but I can tell you a bit of what color they gave us after the fact. It turned out an internal data center employee had received a $50,000 bribery to place the Raspberry Pis under the data center floorboard. It was slowly siphoning information out every day, going undetected through the legacy defenses. Luckily, DarkTrace was installed and detected it. So I give some of these examples, and after the demo, I'm going to give you some more kind of fun examples. I always feel like they're interesting ones to share because they're unusual, but they're real. And we're finding them. And we're finding them before companies are making it onto front page news. And that's really important. We can detect these subtle, silent threats. We can detect low and slow. We can detect insider. By the way, all the other stuff we can detect as well, not using signatures, using behaviors, using artificial intelligence. But I'm really fascinated by the ones that otherwise would remain undetected, that would later become a real problem. So with that, I'd like to invite my colleague up, who's going to give you a visual demonstration. And the reason we do this is another interesting thing is we had to think about one of the biggest complaints about artificial intelligence and machine learning is it's a black box. And so we right away said, how do we get around this concept of it's a black box? We came up with an extremely visual UI, and it shows you what's going on in your network in ways you've never seen before. It gives you the ability to investigate and remediate threats in ways you've never been able to before. It also makes you think about, I think, security in a new and unique way. You have to kind of let go of the old style of thinking. And most of all, I guess, it was designed by, I think it was someone who was about 22, 23 years old. He designed the UI entirely by himself. And we often get told it's probably one of the coolest UIs anyone's ever seen, but also some of the most practical that they've ever seen. Are we all set, Megan, for the demo?
Should be good.
Great. So we'll do a brief demo, and then I'll come up and tell more of these fun stories.
So as Nicole mentioned, this is more to show you, that AI incorporated into teams, how they're working it. We work everywhere from a team of one that wears many hats to global deployments where you're looking at 20 to 30 people on the security team. What I opened up first within the threat visualizer, which is the DarkTrace UI, is the dynamic threat dashboard. So this is a unified view to show you, here are the alerts that we're seeing. But in more detail, on the left, we're going to go ahead and prioritize them, higher degrees of anomalies. So the ones on the top, obviously, the most severe that we're seeing. But then what's most important for teams is get the context. A lot of times I get complaints of, prior to DarkTrace, I would see something that might have been malicious, but I didn't have enough information to do anything. So I had to sit back and watch while I potentially just saw something become more and more damaging. With DarkTrace, we give you that context so that you can dig in and say, here's exactly what happened, here's what we're seeing, all in real time, and they're able to essentially go in and take action immediately. So here on the right, we're starting to see more information on this particular breach. It's an unusual data transfer, so we're seeing it's 87% anomalous. The host name, when we had first seen the device, when we had last seen it. This graph on the left is actually our clustering. So we're also going to say this device acts similar to X number of devices. Their general pattern of life is essentially the same. Go ahead and put them into a cluster so then we'll know this is more evidence that we're seeing anomalies associated with this device, this user, et cetera. On the right, we're seeing more information about what occurred. So this is the event summary. It's essentially going to show you, here's the relevant information that you need to know, the activity that led up to this anomaly, and then the anomalous activity itself. Here we see unusual activity, 77%, due to external data transfer, internal data transfer, and then external connections to closed ports. Most likely, this isn't enough information to immediately take action, so you want to go in and investigate further. So put on your analyst hat, jump into the threat visualizer, the 3D visualizer, which is here. And if I open up this alert, I can click on the host name or the magnifying glass, and I'm immediately brought to the device in question. Again, context is key in order to be able to act. So the visualization's updated, so we are seeing the device in question, but also I'll open up the event summary again, and here I'll see the relevant activity prior to this anomalous alert. So if I press play, I will actually see the visualizations on the right update, as well as the summary on the left. So this particular case, we see some unusual activity, connections to file servers, and then pretty significant movement across the network, these SMB read successes. This was actually a disgruntled employee who was ready to walk out the door. Most likely, this was information that he would generally access, had access to, but on his day-to-day, he probably accessed it file to file, folder to folder, instead of grabbing such large pieces of data across the network. We also correlated this with connections or attempts to mega Tor project and Dropbox. So what DarkTrace is able to do is say, this is anomalous, 77%, and then give you context on that. External data transfer, internal data transfer, and then again, those external connections to closed ports. Most importantly, Antigena is going to go ahead and take action. So we're going to stop all outgoing traffic for the next 3 hours for this particular device. What's really important to note about Antigena is that we're stopping it for this particular device, this particular model, this particular user. So it's just unified to this instance, this case. We've seen other instances where someone's computer has been compromised. They're clearly not acting maliciously. They didn't know their computer was compromised. So their day-to-day activity is regular. That shouldn't be stopped. Business needs to continue to occur as it should. So what DarkTrace is able to do is just stop the anomalous activity, isolate that so that their day-to-day is still able to carry on while the security team, the IT team, is able to address the issue at hand. So that's a quick example that we've seen. If we go back to the home page, when you first log in, this is most likely what you would be able to see. It's important to note, even for large deployments, you're going to look at one unified screen. So it's our way of saying, hey, no matter where you're deployed, here's your entire enterprise. We'll show you where anomalies are associated across the network. Everything is color coordinated. My VPN is being a little sluggish. But these cubes illustrate different points where DarkTrace is seeing traffic. The cooler colors show regular activity, whereas these brighter colors, again, it's our way of saying, hey, here are the anomalies on the network. We also want to give you information on what we're seeing in the network. Nicole mentioned the 15 to 60-minute install. I actually got a lot of pushback at RSA, so I was adamant that one of my engineers let me go with them. And they actually did it in 25 minutes. So I promise it is a legitimate thing. But here what we're seeing on the left, number of devices. It's a very difficult number to get. We mentioned IoT devices, people bringing plenty of devices onto the network. Really having a finite idea of the number of devices you'll see is a difficult thing to grasp. Generally, I will double it when I ask someone, how many devices should we see on your network? They're always surprised when we plug in and we say, hey, there are an additional 2,000 devices, 500 devices. If you don't know what's on your network, it's very hard to monitor, be able to pay attention and say, this is what I need to watch. DarkTrace is able to see out towards all those IoT devices. I saw an iPhone compromise last week, smart TVs. It has run the gamut of really what people are able to get into on the networks. We'll also show you, what traffic, how traffic is moving across the network, and then where Antigena is taking action. Down here at the bottom is the threat tray. So again, it's where that machine learning, unsupervised machine learning and mathematics is going to come together and throw these alerts so that you can see, we have a handful of alerts here, you're able to drill in and get the context that you'd need. Again, same process as before. A lot of times people, Nicole mentioned, even if it's a non-malicious employee, you still want to know, okay, what's the context behind it? How are they able to get on that device if it were compromised? What were they able to access? What were they attempting to access? So in the same process as before, we're able to see the credentials that they're using and then how they're moving across the network. You can scroll down and see any kind of prior information around the same time as the anomaly. So in the top right, when you click on that magnifying glass, it takes you back to that alert at that time. So here we see pretty significant address scanning within 445, and then they're actually able to walk into an administrative directory and then start pulling administrative documents, spec sheets, pricing. This is the information that you want to see. What's leaving my network? How are they behaving? I doubt that this was Sue Smith ferociously typing away on on our workstation, but what we're able to tell you is, here's the context so that you can go ahead and act. Regarding PCAPs, a lot of times, the first question I get is, well, what do you replace? What's really neat about DarkTrace is we're here to fill in the gaps. We're not necessarily here to rip and replace. I personally think there isn't a silver bullet in cybersecurity that you need something that's going to complement what you're already using. So we can implement with just about anything you're using, be able to go on from there, Wireshark with your PCAPs, whatever it may be. But again, streamline the process so that you're able to get to the relevant information. From a reporting standpoint, there is an executive report. We found these really important. A lot of times, your C-suite doesn't want to necessarily get into the weeds and have to look through all of these alerts, et cetera. So they'll want a unified view, show me how we've changed the past week, et cetera. So I'll generate a report for the past week in this particular organization. And here I'm going to get a summary report on the network. Zoom in. So we'll start with, phases of attack. Here's what we're seeing across the network. Egress, reconnaissance, lateral movement, where are the hot spots, what do you guys need to address, what's getting better? I think a lot of times security focuses on negative, but where are we actually accomplishing things within the team? So here we see number of breaches is 5% lower this week compared with the previous reporting period. So again, you're able to have this reporting and be able to bring it across. We'll also go into more detail, compliance models that are being breached. Again, just that unified summary to give to C-suite, your IT team to say, here's where we're doing well, here's where we can ramp it up, and then just the context, and then go into the UI and dig in.
Great, thank you very much, Megan. So we'll wrap up with a couple more kind of fun threat stories, and then while I'm doing this, please get your questions ready, and we'll hopefully be able to locate folks with microphones to get those for you. So this is one, we actually announced this one during Black Hat in Las Vegas this year. So there was a casino that was a customer of ours. Unbeknownst to the security team and the IT team, they had a very large shark tank. The shark tank had an IoT-connected thermostat. The attacker found the IoT thermostat, used it as a jumping-off point to get into the network, started lateral movement to try to find the high roller database. This was an actual attack. The attack was successful. They found portions of the data, started laterally moving it, packaging it up for exfiltration. We saw all of this activity, started quarantining it, and were able to stop it after the first handful of files started going to, for whatever reason, Finland. So this was an actual attack that we had to anonymize, but nevertheless report on. And I think it's just another example of how they're just going to scan the networks and find these insecure devices. And by the way, we talk a lot about IoT. Some of you in the room may also come from energy, utility, water supply, manufacturing. We also do everything we're talking about and showing here for SCADA environments, for PLMs, PLCs, so industrial IoT. So it's not just data centers and networks. And it's fascinating because of the self-learning technique. We don't need to know any prior knowledge. So it can be this thermostat, we had never seen one of these before. There's all kinds of proprietary equipment in some of the PLM, PLC environments we've never seen before. We just we mathematically model the pattern of life, even if we don't understand what the device is. I mentioned the Bitcoin mining one, just a little more detail on that. So the first Bitcoin mining attack we actually saw was about almost 3 years ago now in an Italian bank. And someone on the outside had broken into the network of the bank. And when we got brought in, we were brought in because they said, we just want visibility into the network. It's performing slowly. We've run all our diagnostic tools. We cannot put our finger on it. It took us about 2 weeks. We modeled their large network, and we were able to figure out that someone from the outside, we don't even think they realized the irony. They may not have even known they broke into a bank, and they were using the bank's infrastructure to manufacture the Bitcoins. And we saw that actually then travel through some other European banks, and we thought that was going to be the end of it. Next thing you know, as I said, it jumped over to the US, but in the US, sometimes it was outsiders breaking in, but we saw a run of privileged users, system administrators, deciding they wanted to make some money on the side, and what was the harm in using their own company's infrastructure to manufacture these Bitcoins? I had someone come up to me. I was in San Francisco presenting an event last week. This gentleman from, I think he was from Iceland, came up to me, and he showed me this picture, and he said, "Do you know what this is?" I'm like, "No." He said, "This is a Bitcoin mining farm." He goes, "We have 3 buildings," and I had never seen so many servers in my life. And he goes, "I have 3 massive buildings, and this is the kind of infrastructure it takes to manufacture Bitcoin." So I guess if you want to get in the Bitcoin age in this day and age and make some money off it, you need a lot of money to have all this infrastructure, and most people don't. So they're starting to use corporate infrastructure to do that. So it's something to be on the lookout for. We also see all different kinds of information. We have obviously seen credit card information and PII. We do a lot of compliance work. One of the things I didn't mention, all of our models work out of the box, but we had some customers like financial institutions, folks doing things like credit card fraud detection. They had their own AI teams. They had their own mathematicians. So they asked us if we would actually open up our model editor. We're like, we hadn't thought about that, but okay. So we actually have a model editor where we'll show you the basics of how the models work, and if you want to edit those models, create new models, you can. Now, I'll also say our models cannot be shut off. So if you actually had a clever AI person trying to use our system to deceive DarkTrace, it can't be done. We'll leave our models all running in the background with visibility into them, but if you want to create your own models, and there's some simple models people have created. So one would be BYOD devices, right? So it used to be everyone was pro-BYOD. Now we see a lot of pendulum swing towards anti-BYOD. So you can actually say, here's the 5 different configurations of allowed BYOD devices. If anyone connects something other than these 5, I want them to get a nice reminder that links them to our policy on BYOD. If they do it again, I want the connection cut off, I want their manager notified, and you can do whatever you want, depending on your policies, your culture. We have people use this to, a lot of times I see companies spend tons of money on legal fees for outside counsel to create insider threat policies, and then it's never connected to the network. So how are you enforcing that? So you can actually use DarkTrace, because we'll see everything, to enforce all different kinds of policies and take action or do alerts or send notifications, or you can have someone text message, whatever you want to do. Again, it's not a black box. I mentioned IoT. About 2 months ago, we had a customer was attacked. They had 80 voice over IP devices that were involved in a DDoS attack. We found one that was a fast food restaurant, and they had 1,000 stores. And we said, what's going on with these 10 stores? Because they have devices that are behaving differently than the other 990 stores. They said, well, interestingly enough, that's where we test new equipment in those 10 stores. We said, well, apparently you have this IP connection, and we can break right into it, and we can actually mess around with it. And they said, that actually is new refrigeration units we're testing. We said, well, do you realize we could actually lower the temperature on that or increase the temperature on it, spoil the food, and you'd be kind of in quite a bit of trouble, from a brand and a reputation and people getting ill. So there's these, again, are all real attacks that are happening day in, day out. So with that, I'm going to open it up to Q&A. Do we have any questions, and do we have any microphones? We have a question over here.
What's your false positive percentage?
So with respect to false positives, there's 2 ways to look at them. Where false positives usually come in to play is if you're using training data sets. So many times we'll kind of hear rates like that Google publishes on image recognition, right? And we'll all hear about how it mistakenly thought an ostrich was a dog. That's because they're using training data sets. we don't use training data sets. So from that perspective, there is no false positive because we're not using any historical training data, so there's nothing to match it against. So, and the other thing we're doing is the other time you'll hear false positives is people build models, right? So there was a security company that's already come and gone out of business. They were building custom models. So they'd build a model for healthcare, and they'd say, here's a model for hospitals. And then you deploy in the first hospital, because you custom write it for them. Then you pick that up and you deploy it in the second hospital. And it turned out the second hospital didn't use any of the same network architecture as the first hospital, so you end up with all these false positives. In DarkTrace's model, we're analyzing raw network traffic off your own network. Now, the only thing you can classify then as a false positive is, did it classify as something interesting over a certain probability, and you found it to be normal business processes and benign? Now, that gets you back into that example I gave of the first Raspberry Pi, which is, it wasn't malicious, but nevertheless, they didn't change the default password, so that was still a vulnerability that I personally would want to know if I were in the security department. So what we do is, we do have, when Megan was showing the demo, there's a place you can click. So there's a slider bar, first of all, and most of our customers say, I only want to see things with over a 70% probability that a threat is evolving. You can slide that to whatever you want. We have other institutions like nuclear power plants who say, I want to see everything if it's in this segment of my network. So first of all, that will weed out, the probability of threat. The next thing it does is there is an acknowledge button. So you can actually click the acknowledge button as to whether this is interesting or not, and we'll track whether a human actually bothered to investigate it. So I guess it depends on how you want to classify false positive, would be the answer. But if you have your slider bar up over 70%, you're interested in the majority of things that it's finding. But if you find, and you can be very specific, you could say, in this part of the network, or if I have someone on a watch list, I want to know with any tolerance. So you can be very specific. And that's probably it. It's rather than tune models, you're really just tuning the sensitivity to different types of models in your network. Any other questions?
So let's say if when DarkTrace is brought into the network and one of the devices is already compromised, would it flag it? Would it be able to flag it as compromised?
Excellent question. So in 95% of the trials that we do, there's already something going on inside the network, 95% of the time. So we always are in that situation, more or less. And what it does happen, and one of the reasons I said we don't touch it and you don't touch it for a week while it's doing the self-learning, one of the reasons for that is we will learn that bad as normal in that first week. We then use all kinds of techniques mathematically to cluster and eliminate that out so that we can determine that, in fact, it wasn't normal, even though we learned normal on day 3. By day 13, we know it's not normal. By the end of 30 days, anything that was historical in that environment at the time we deployed, we've mainly weeded out. There'll be the occasional case of like dormant malware that wakes up every 90 days. Well, we won't be able to determine that until it wakes up on day 90. But absolutely, there is known bad. And again, when I say there is bad going on, it may not always be malicious, but we'll usually in the first week or two, quite frankly, we have a field day. We have no lack of being able to find interesting things that your other security tools missed, because even just humans are on your network. If humans are on your network, we will find them doing not so smart stuff. Any other questions? We have one question over here, a couple questions over here.
How do you implement the antigen part of your defense once you find a threat?
Yeah, so Antigena has been fascinating, and we took the rollout of Antigena, I'd say, very cautiously, because we realized that autonomous response could very well be the future. At the same time, we did not in any way want autonomous response to get kind of any negativity in the market. So we took 30 of our customers across all different sectors. One, for example, was a hedge fund, and we deployed Antigena, and they said, if this ever slows down or stops a trade, we are turning this thing off and ripping it out so fast your head will spin. We said, okay, that's noted. So we had to figure out how to actually make it so that it could be this specific, this precise. that if they said it can never impact a trade, well, let's not have it during trading hours ever stop anything without a human confirming it. So we added a whole new feature called human confirmation mode. But the other thing that we did is initially we thought Antigena would have to be in line to take these 20 different actions. We actually found there was a lot of different methods we could use working with network traffic, handing off to other products that sat in line, where companies could decide if they wanted to have us sit passive or sit active. So in some ways, I guess, we can be the brain that would actually do the orchestration. So we've written, for example, integration into firewalls. So if the right answer is that we're the brain, we detected it, it's validated it, we want to take the action, but the firewall should take the action instead of Antigena, we just hand off to the firewall and it can take the action. So in a way, I guess we can also act as a bit of orchestration in that process. Any other questions? Do we have a microphone that can come up towards the front?
A question here. Have you taken
Yes.
your product and moved it into other areas? You talk about letting it sit on a network for a week and gather and figure out what life looks like, but there's millions and millions of cars out there. Have you sat on a place where you take a particular function and say, okay, we see cars that are malfunctioning, or this is the normal life of a car, and here's something so you could prevent airbag going off crazy, or people accelerating, it's not their fault, it's the car. So have you gone outside the network into other areas with this technology?
So cybersecurity itself is so big, I'd say what we have done is go into adjacent markets. So we started with more, enterprise data center, network traffic, devices connected to network. That led us to industrial control systems, so the SCADA, PLM, PLCs, the industrial IoT. We have an investor, Samsung's actually an investor in us, so we've actually done some work on how this could be implemented with consumers. We actually have a number of auto manufacturers as our customers. They normally start with us on the plant floor, but they have brought us in now to talk a little bit about connected cars, the connectivity between the car. So if I lock my keys in the car, the connection that goes back so they can unlock the door. So we've started looking at some of those patterns of communication. And of course, we have a lot of interest from the autonomous vehicle folks. What we haven't done is take it out of the realm of security into, let's say, how do you find maintenance, repair operations, and other things. And I will also want to clarify, I should have done this during the talk itself, there's a big difference between what's called narrow AI and broad AI. So narrow AI is when you take a very specific use case like we have with cyber defense and solve the problem using artificial intelligence. That has no correlation or connection in any way to general AI. General AI is where we all worry about, robots and AI having feelings and all of that stuff. Those two disciplines are not in any way connected. So when I talk about our applications, it very much falls under what would be called narrow specific use case AI, and in this case, applied very much to cyber. Now, a lot of the technology could be applied in other areas, and we actually have investors who have portfolio companies who use some of the similar approaches, but for entire different purposes. A question here.
Hi, my name is Ramesh Reddy. You mentioned about industrial control systems and the IoT. This morning, actually, I was talking to Megan about that area where DarkTrace can be used. One of the issues in the industrial control systems area is you can't go in and then do things with the SCADA systems. For example, you can't do vulnerability scanning like that. So how are you convincing your customers that you can drop in DarkTrace box and then use the UI without actually interrupting their data flow and other stuff?
It's the passive nature. So it was one of the reasons we felt it was really important to sit passively, whether it be an industrial control system, whether it be a financial services with high volumes of transactions and money moving. So we absolutely sit passive, so there is no disruption in the system. What we did find that's different in industrial control systems is even to implement passively, we have to sometimes install within their windows, right? So they might say, okay, our next downtime is 3 months from now or 6 months from now for this amount of time. Can you install your appliance in that specific window? Okay. So there are, some caveats when you get into industrial control systems that are quite a bit different. There might be kind of lockout or blackout periods around peak times for retailers or e-commerce sites, but outside of that, normally because we're passive, you can install, at any point. So there are some caveats that we're sensitive to. The other thing with industrial control, I thought at first there'd never be a use case for autonomous response and Antigena in a SCADA nuclear power plant or in a production line. And actually, we had people come back to us and say, no, you're wrong. For example, safety comes above security in some of those environments. They said, well, if Antigena could actually say, anytime this occurs, a human is in a part of our plant they shouldn't have been, and an LED light sensor senses them, just turn all the lights on for safety reasons in the plant. Like, okay, great use case. So we're finding by working with various customers in some of the industrial control that there are some even use cases where it can help with security, but also positively influence safety. Any final questions? Yes, we have one question here.
With this system, it seems like you essentially have to give the keys to the kingdom of the network, right? So how are you protecting your clients' information? And on top of that, you mentioned earlier that at the inception of this of your tool.
I can hear it, but the people in the back might not be able to.
Do you want me to start over? Is this good?
So the first part was, are we giving the keys to the kingdom, and how are we protecting customers' data?
Correct. And at the conception of DarkTrace, you mentioned that you had like the MI5, MI6, and all these smart people. That kind of leads to other questions like, are you being outsmarted? Are there backdoors involved? We just had Kaspersky and Russia, NSA and RSA. So could talk on that a little bit?
Both great questions. I'll answer very quickly because I know it looks like we're running out of time. So the first one is, I should have also clarified, we don't actually ever touch any of your data. So we don't upload it to a cloud. There are systems that take all your network traffic and move it to their cloud, analyze it, compare it with other customers. Because we do work in industrial control, because we work in financial services, because we work with government, all of your data stays locally on your premise. If you have a cloud, we add a sensor to the servers in the cloud. It always stays with you. If you decide you would like one of our threat analysts to help you out investigating specific threats, they only get access to the models on the DarkTrace system, not your data. And so if you want that as a service, we can help with that, but it's not required. So for instance, we do the analysis for a major US stock exchange. Our folks have never had eyes on that system or on the models or anything else. So it's optional, and they will just be logging in securely to the DarkTrace appliance, and DarkTrace watches the DarkTrace appliance. And your second one, we actually made sure there are no backdoors into DarkTrace. It's self-learning, it keeps learning. Every time you change anything on your network, you reconfigure something, you add new devices, it just keeps learning and self-learning, but it does not have any. From our perspective, we don't require any access. It's only at your option, and we do it in a very secure way. Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure being here.